welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today, I'll be commenting on episode 27 of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So this little scene we have here, based off of the end of the last episode and a little snippet of something we saw earlier. You know, Ed's father really seems extraordinary in that he, in the present day, appears to be the same age as he does here back when Pinako, Winry's grandmother, was a young woman. So it seems to me that the narrative purpose of this episode is perhaps to flesh out a bit more about the Elric's father. You know, we've sort of seen not much of him, and what we have makes him seem kind of sinister. I mean, we have seen him talk to Pinako on occasion, and he seems a little bit less so. And he certainly doesn't seem sinister here, you know, he just seems kind of like a loner more than anything else. So it's interesting that even back in Pinako's youth, you know, Amestris was seemingly constantly at war with surrounding territories and countries. You know, it really seems like the war might be a bigger part of this plan, considering that Amestris itself is sort of circular in shape. Yeah, you know, we're being explicitly shown conflicts in all regions surrounding Amestris, so it seems like there's almost like a ring of corpses surrounding Amestris. And given what we learned from Envy, you know, he all but admitted that Xerxes was destroyed by transmuting everyone, you know, Amestris is on the verge of suffering the same fate. So this is a new side of Hohenheim, you know, he really just does seem like a lonely guy rather than someone who's actively evil. Oh, you know what? I think this might just be Hohenheim sort of thinking to himself here, remembering and reminiscing, rather than Pinako actually saying something anachronistic. And interestingly, he's sort of conversing as though this is like a serious deal here. So one has to wonder what precisely is going on, because Honheim, like, he's not totally above board here. Something is more complicated than is initially apparent. Man, this episode really seems like a good excuse to reuse some of the horrific footage from earlier on. You know, I guess in a way, it's kind of good that this scene was as, I don't know what the term would be, as, moderated as it was, I guess. You know, we didn't see, like, all the exacting detail of the corpse. Probably for the best, honestly, considering how malformed it was. So it's interesting that even in the books Edward was reading, it sort of says that the Philosopher's Stone was responsible for the destruction of Xerxes in one night. So, between that and what Envy said, you know, it really seems like there's some really unfortunate stuff going on. You know, I'm trying to think, and I can't really think of an anime made much later than this that really uses recap episodes like this. I mean, this isn't entirely a recap episode because it's sort of intermingling new stuff with old stuff. But, you know, that was sort of like a relatively common practice. Alright, so this is an interesting development. There's two Hohenheims, as it were. One of them seems more just kind of lonely, one of them seems more nihilistic. You know, I'm gonna have to go back and watch some of the old footage to see, you know, if these two sort of aspects were differentiated by the clothes they wear as they were in this scene. You know, maybe I'm just reading a little too deeply into this, but that might be like a nice little continuity detail that's been maintained. I'd be curious to see if that is in fact the case. But back to the topic of recap episodes. Normally, they just sort of like recap the plot thus far. And I guess this is, in fact, what is being done here, but it's sort of recapping the plot as it pertains to the Philosopher's Stone and sort of what we know so far, rather than the plot in its entirety in chronological order, if that makes any sense. Because, like, you know, if they were doing it in the way that I would think of, they would go into a little bit of detail about, like, Barry the Trapper. Ooh, he used to be a serial killer, but he's not anymore. You know, there would be, like, other bits of backstory and lore. You know, in this recap episode, they're just sort of talking about things that pertain to the Philosopher's Stone. So it's more focused in a way. I think this scene's a nice little reminder about Edward's principles in that he is unwilling to kill another person, and wretched though these guys are, they still sort of count. I mean, at this point, like, he really hasn't killed anyone, although he's gotten pretty darn close. It doesn't really apply to Brotherhood here, but I seem to recall in the 2003 version, he was actually the one to kill Greed, and I want to say he took it rather poorly, and understandably so. You know, I have to wonder, the natural sort of question to ask here about Edward's principles are, would he kill a homunculus? Because, in a weird sort of way, it is living, but, you know, you can't really call it human, strictly speaking, so, you know, would he be willing to kill one of them, given the opportunity? Obviously, Roy Mustang has no issues with that. You know, he torched lust like it was no thing, and, well, you know, I feel like he doesn't really have any compunctions about torching any of the others either. You know, it's a nice touch that they sort of tied everything together in terms of the conspiracy. You know, Hughes is talking about how there are all these uprisings and genocides all around the place, and Dr. Marco sort of says, you know, it forms a neat little transmutation circle, and you intend to transmute everyone into a Philosopher's Stone. Now we're seeing what happened to Xerxes. You know, it's a neat little editing trick. Alright, so we're learning a little bit more. You know, Hohenheim is confirming that he is, in fact, pretty darn ancient, and that he continues to watch humanity make the same mistakes over and over again has kind of left him jaded. I mean, understandably so. History does kind of tend to repeat itself, and often not for the better. You know, I'm wondering if this whole little, like, campfire interlude with Hohenheim is truly a product of his own imagination, or if it really is, like, a memory or something in between. Because it really sort of has aspects of both. You know, it's nice to see the little snippets of that in between all the other stuff. You know, the sort of, true forms of the homunculi. Envy transforming to that giant monster, and Gluttony opening its mouth all the way. You know, it's interesting. We've seen a whole lot about 5 of the homunculi so far, but Sloth and Pride are still sort of, incognito for now, I guess. Like, they're presumably doing stuff in the background, but they're just not playing a central role like the others are so far. I mean, that's not to say Greed was working with the others. He was off doing his own thing and paid rather dearly for it. Alright, so with what we've seen with those sort of 2 aspects of Hohenheim, I have to wonder if this is in fact Hohenheim, or rather a separate entity. I mean, we'll probably find out in a little bit, I guess, seeing as how Alphonse was on his way to go meet him. So this is interesting in a weird sort of way, in that Hohenheim is talking about how everything is essentially futile, and a younger Pinako is sort of telling him that he's wrong and that humanity will persevere. Because that version of Pinako is essentially a memory, but she's talking to him as though she exists in the present. It's messing with time in a weird kind of way. You know, it really seems like those little campfire segments and then the other recap segments that follow it sort of relate to one another. Because Hohenheim was talking about, people not giving up, and then it sort of shifts to Ed fighting greed and ultimately gaining the upper hand, and Alphonse resolving to fight Scar. And he's sort of giving the speech about how, yes, he is kind of an abomination, but it was alchemy that saved his life, And horrible though his condition is, it's darn sight better than being dead. And just to sort of play both sides of it here, Scar's brother defending him also sort of qualifies for this, He was unwilling to let people sort of... No, maybe die in vain isn't the right phrase, but, he definitely wanted to do right by his brother. And just to really put a fine point on the whole thing, Lanfan is a rather good example of being unwilling to give up, considering how she hacks her own arm off. I mean, this particular scene makes it seem as though she slit her own throat to sort of lessen Ling's burden, but I mean, it's insane either way. Hacking off an arm or slitting your own throat. Alright, so the plot gets thick again. Hohenheim, the sort of jaded, lonely one, has disappeared and is replaced by the more nihilistic one. And incidentally, the clothing does change again. The clothing changes and he doesn't have the glasses. Okay. So that would explain a fair bit. This is sort of like something going on in Hohenheim's mind. Oh, this is interesting. So that sort of visual effect there with all the little souls, it would seem to imply that Hohenheim's longevity might be the result of a Philosopher's Stone. So it seems like he wants to be hopeful, but everything seems so monumentally stacked against humanity that giving up might seem like the better thing to do, if only because you're not going to waste all the effort. So I think this is sort of the linchpin of things. It's Trisha Elric who seems to have given him hope. This is sort of like a common sentiment that everybody feels small and unable to affect things on any meaningful scale. And at the same time, they're sick of their own helplessness. Trisha makes a compelling argument that, in a way, it's sort of like the weakness of humanity that forces them to change because growth is the only option. It's either that or die. It's pretty compelling. So whether or not this conversation is happening now or sometime in the past, it's unclear, but it seems that the upshot is that Hohenheim has gained some measure of resolve here. I'm almost sort of reminded of the end of Neon Genesis Evangelion, where everyone's standing around in a circle and clapping and congratulating Shinji for, finally getting that lesson through his thick skull. I wonder if that was a deliberate thing. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.